During the Great Depression, most families stood in bread lines, but some ate better than you do right now. Not because they were rich, not because they were lucky, because they grew 20 vegetables that laughed at drought, shrugged off frost, and fed their families all winter long. No grocery store, no supply chain, no problem. We stopped growing them. We forgot their names. Until now. Vegetable number 1, rutabaga. The rutabaga, the root that outlasted everything. Back when a dollar had to stretch further than a fence post on flat ground, smart families planted rutabagas. People called it the poor man's potato, but that nickname doesn't do it justice. This root packed more vitamin C than an orange, and in winter, when fresh food was scarce as hen's teeth, that mattered more than most folks realized. What made the rutabaga worth its weight in seed money was its staying power. You could pull one in late fall, drop it in a root cellar, and it would still be firm and good 6 months later. No canning, no special treatment, just cool, dark storage and patience. And rutabagas didn't care much about poor soil. While other crops sulked and quit, rutabagas kept right on growing, producing bumper harvests, even in the worst conditions. Plant them in late summer, harvest before hard frost, and you had food security locked in for the whole winter. Vegetable number 2, mangel-wurzel. The mangel-wurzel, the giant that fed the whole farm. Most men today have never heard of a mangel-wurzel. That's a shame, because during the Depression, this oversized beet was worth more than gold to a working family. These roots grew as big as a bowling ball, some pushing 20 pounds, and they pulled double duty on the farm. Families ate them like regular beets, roasting them to bring out a natural sweetness that made plain meals feel like something special. But they also fed them to the hogs, the cattle, and the chickens through the long winter months when pasture was gone and hay was running low. 1 crop, 2 jobs. That's Depression-era efficiency. Store them in a root cellar, and they'd keep for months, giving you food security when everything else had run out. Vegetable number 3, salsify. Salsify, the oyster plant that grew in the ground. Here's one that'll surprise you. Salsify, sometimes called the oyster plant, produced roots that tasted like fresh oysters right out of the ground. For families who hadn't seen seafood in years, that was a luxury hiding in plain dirt. What made salsify a Depression-era favorite was its patience. You didn't have to harvest it on any particular schedule. Leave it in the ground all winter, and it waited for you, staying fresh right where it grew. Nature's own root cellar. Clever gardeners also discovered they were getting 2 vegetables for the price of 1 seed. The roots went into soups and stews, and the greens went into the pot right alongside them. Nothing wasted, not a single leaf. Vegetable number 4, Jerusalem artichoke. Jerusalem artichoke, the Native American survivor. Long before the Depression, Native Americans were growing Jerusalem artichokes and teaching settlers what real food security looked like. These weren't just vegetables. They were a system. Plant them once, and they came back every single year, spreading on their own, asking for nothing. The tubers had a natural sweetness from a compound called inulin, making them a genuine treat when sugar was a luxury most families couldn't afford. But the real value was in the harvest window. You could dig Jerusalem artichokes all winter long, even when the ground was frozen solid. Just break through the frost, pull what you needed, and leave the rest for next week. Every season the patch grew bigger. Every season you had more food than the year before. That's not a vegetable. That's a food system. Vegetable number 5, parsnip. Parsnips. Nature's sugar factory. Here's something most gardeners today don't know. Leave a parsnip in the ground through a hard frost, and something almost magical happens. The cold converts the starches into natural sugars. That plain, ordinary root transforms into something sweet. Nature's candy, grown in your own back 40. During the Depression, that sweetness was priceless. Sugar cost money. Parsnips cost a packet of seeds. Depression-era families planted a row in spring, let the frost do its work in fall, and dug them up all winter long, using the frozen earth as free cold storage. They were calorie-dense, too. more energy per bite than carrots or potatoes, which mattered when you were putting in 12-hour days on a farm and needed fuel that lasted. Tall stakes marked the rows under the snow. Come February, you knew exactly where to dig. Vegetable number 6, Hamburg rooted parsley. Hamburg rooted parsley, the two-in-one wonder. Most folks know parsley as that green stuff on the edge of a plate at a diner, but Depression-era gardeners grew a completely different animal. Hamburg rooted parsley, a variety that developed thick, sturdy roots underground while still producing full, leafy tops above. The roots stored perfectly through winter in a simple root cellar, providing food when fresh vegetables were nothing but a memory. The leaves were packed with more vitamin C than oranges and added fresh flavor to meals year-round. Smart gardeners harvested leaves all summer, dried extras for winter, then dug the roots in fall and stored them alongside their turnips and rutabagas. 2 harvests, 1 plant, 1 packet of seeds. That's the kind of math that kept families fed when the bank account was empty. Vegetable number 7, turnip. Turnips, the 6-week savior. When other crops failed and time was running short before winter, families turned to turnips. 6 weeks, that's all it took, from seed in the ground to food on the table. No other vegetable in the garden could match that speed, and during the Depression, speed meant survival. Turnips laughed at drought. They grew strong when other plants were wilting in the heat, and families learned to use every single part. The roots were eaten fresh, mashed like potatoes, or stored in root cellars for months. The greens were cooked up like spinach, packed with nutrients that kept families healthy through the lean months. Some families planted turnips 3 times in a season, early for fresh eating, mid-season for storage, late for a steady supply of greens right up until hard freeze. Nothing went to waste, not 1 leaf, not 1 root. Vegetable number 8, collard greens. Collard greens, the survivor's green. If you needed one vegetable that simply refused to quit, it was collard greens. Summer heat waves that wilted lettuce and spinach flat. Collards stood tall. Winter frost that killed off everything else in the garden. Collards just got sweeter, surviving temperatures down to 10 degrees and still producing fresh food for the table. Depression-era gardeners started picking the lower leaves in early summer, and those plants kept producing new growth from the top, like a never-ending food factory running on nothing but sunlight and rain. When they had more than they could eat fresh, they canned it, dried it, or salted it down in barrels for winter. Collards packed more calcium than most vegetables and enough vitamin C to keep a family healthy through the cold months. 1 planting, months of harvest. That's a vegetable that earns its place in the ground. Vegetable number 9, Swiss chard. Swiss chard, the cut-and-come-again champion. Here's a vegetable that rewarded hard work with more hard work in the best possible way. Swiss chard had a quality Depression-era families depended on. The more you cut it, the more it grew. Pick the outer leaves today, come back in a week, and there were new ones ready to go. Same plant all season long. While lettuce bolted and turned bitter in the summer heat, Swiss chard kept right on producing tender leaves. A few plants near the kitchen door meant fresh greens from late spring until the hard frosts of fall. No replanting, no fuss. The leaves were loaded with vitamins A and C, nutrients that were hard to come by when the grocery store was out of reach and the family budget was tighter than a new boot. Plant a short row, and it fed a family for months. That's value you can't put a price on. Vegetable number 10, Danish ballhead cabbage. Danish ballhead cabbage, the winter keeper. Not all cabbages are created equal. During the Depression, one variety stood head and shoulders above the rest, the Danish ballhead. This wasn't your ordinary cabbage. It was bred for one purpose, to last. The heads were packed so dense and tight that a single cabbage felt as heavy as a bowling ball in your hands. That density was the secret. Store a Danish ballhead in a root cellar and it stayed fresh for 6 to 8 months. No special treatment, no electricity, no refrigeration. Just cool, dark storage and patience. Even after frost hit the garden, these cabbages stood their ground, actually getting sweeter as the temperature dropped. Families harvested heads all the way until the ground froze solid. One serving delivered as much vitamin C as a glass of orange juice, critical in winter when fresh fruit was nothing but a memory. Plant in midsummer, harvest in fall. Eat all winter. That's a crop worth knowing. Vegetable number 11, navy beans. Navy beans, the protein powerhouse. When meat was too expensive for the table, Depression-era families turned to navy beans. Pound for pound, these small white beans delivered nearly as much protein as a serving of meat, at a fraction of the cost. A single row in the garden could produce enough dried beans to carry a family through the entire winter. But navy beans had a trick up their sleeve that went beyond the dinner table. They fixed nitrogen right out of the air and put it back into the soil, making the garden more productive for next year's crops. Families planted them alongside corn, let the beans climb the stalks, and got two crops from the same ground. The beans dried right on the vine, no special equipment needed, and stored for years in glass jars or cloth sacks. Reliable protein, free fertilizer, and a crop that practically harvested itself. That's why navy beans were worth their weight in seed money. Vegetable number 12, Kentucky Wonderpole beans. Kentucky Wonderpole beans. The vertical victory. Garden space was precious during the Depression. Every square foot had to earn its keep. Kentucky Wonderpole beans solved that problem by growing up instead of out, climbing 7 to 8 feet high and turning a small corner of the garden into a food-producing tower. Once these beans started producing, they were almost impossible to keep up with. The more you picked, the more they grew. Families sent their kids out every morning to harvest the new beans that had appeared overnight. A single plant produced for months. Fresh green beans all summer, then dried beans for winter protein. Depression-era gardeners built simple poles from whatever they had on hand. Branches, old fence posts, baling twine. Even families with tiny backyard plots could grow enough beans to last through winter. Up instead of out. That's smart farming. Vegetable number 13, ground cherries. Ground cherries, nature's candy, wrapped in paper. In a garden full of practical, serious survival crops, ground cherries brought something rare during the Depression: sweetness. These unusual fruits grew inside papery husks that looked like tiny Chinese lanterns, and inside each one was a marble-sized fruit that tasted like pineapple and vanilla mixed together. Depression-era children would hunt through the garden for these wrapped treasures, peeling back the papery husks to find the golden fruit inside. But ground cherries weren't just a treat. They were practical. Store them right in their husks in a cool, dry place, and they kept fresh for months. And once you had them in your garden, you had them forever. They self-seeded year after year, coming back on their own without replanting. Free sweetness every single season from a plant that took care of itself. Vegetable number 14, field peas. Field peas, the tough southern survivor. Down south, when the summer heat turned brutal and the rain stopped coming, field peas kept right on growing. Their deep roots reached down through dry soil to find moisture that would have killed a common bean. They were the drought insurance policy that Depression-era Southern families depended on. Field peas pulled triple duty in the garden. Young pods were eaten fresh like snap beans. Tender peas were shelled for immediate use, and the rest were left to dry right on the vine for winter storage. No special equipment, no canning, just patience. Like navy beans, field peas fixed nitrogen in the soil, enriching the ground for next year's crops. High protein content made them a reliable meat substitute when the smokehouse was empty. A crop that fed the family, improved the soil, and survived the worst summer had to throw at it. That's a vegetable worth planting. Vegetable number 15, storage onions. Storage onions, the long-lasting keeper. Every root cellar worth its salt had a braid of storage onions hanging from the rafters. Not the sweet onions you find at the grocery store today. Those won't last a month. Depression-era families grew tough, long-keeping varieties like Yellow Globe and Australian Brown that stayed good for 8 to 10 months when properly stored. These onions weren't just flavor, they were medicine. The natural compounds in storage onions helped prevent spoilage in other vegetables stored nearby. extending the life of the whole root cellar. Families braided the strong tops together and hung them in cool, dry places, barns, root cellars, back porches. Easy to grow, easy to store, and they added vital nutrients and flavor to every winter meal. A good crop of storage onions meant the difference between eating well and eating plain all winter long. Vegetable number 16, Good King Henry. Good King Henry, the king of spring greens. When the snow finally melted and the garden was still weeks away from producing anything, Good King Henry was already up and growing. This perennial green earned its royal name by providing some of the first fresh food of spring, appearing before almost anything else in the garden was ready. The young shoots came up early enough to be harvested and cooked like asparagus. As the plant grew taller, the arrow-shaped leaves provided fresh greens that could be eaten raw or cooked like spinach. Plant it once in a forgotten corner of the yard, and it came back every year, growing stronger and producing more food each season. It spread itself naturally, creating new plants without any effort from the gardener. For Depression-era families desperate for fresh food after a long winter, Good King Henry wasn't just a vegetable. It was a promise that spring had finally arrived. Vegetable number 17, American groundnut. American groundnut, the native superfood. Long before the Depression, Native Americans knew about a remarkable vine that produced underground tubers with 3 times the protein of potatoes, the American groundnut. European settlers learned about it, grew it, and then somehow the modern world forgot it entirely. During the Depression, that protein content made ground nuts invaluable as a meat substitute. The vines climbed up corn stalks or garden fences, producing clusters of marble-sized tubers that could be harvested without killing the plant. Leave them in the ground through winter, and they stayed fresh, nature's own cold storage. Each plant spread underground, creating new tubers that could be harvested year after year. A patch of groundnuts provided reliable, high-protein food with almost no effort. Virtually indestructible in drought, poor soil, and hard winters. What Native Americans had known for centuries, Depression-era families rediscovered out of necessity. Vegetable number 18, runner beans. Runner beans. Beauty meets bounty. During the Depression, every plant in the garden had to earn its keep. Runner beans went above and beyond. These climbing beans served triple duty: fresh snap beans in summer, dried beans for winter protein, and stunning red, white, and bicolored blossoms that brought a little beauty to even the hardest times. Unlike regular pole beans, runner beans kept flowering and producing even when summer temperatures soared. Families planted them along fences and trellises where they climbed 10 feet or higher, creating edible privacy screens that produce food from ground to sky. Pick them young and tender for fresh eating, or leave them to mature into large, meaty dried beans that provided protein-rich meals all winter. One planting produced continuously for months, with yields so high that many families traded their excess beans for other necessities. A crop that fed the body and lifted the spirit. That's worth growing. Vegetable number 19, dandelion. Cultivated dandelion, the weed that fed families. Most men today spend good money trying to kill dandelions. Depression-era gardeners spent good money buying seed to grow them. They cultivated special varieties that produced leaves twice the size of the wild ones, and they used every single part of the plant. Young leaves made fresh salads in early spring, often providing the first greens of the year before anything else in the garden was ready. Older leaves were cooked like spinach. The flowers were made into wine or fried in batter. The roots were roasted and ground as a coffee substitute when the real thing was too expensive to buy. Dandelions appeared in early spring when families were most desperate for vitamins after a long winter. Deep tap roots meant they survived drought and poor soil without complaint. A plant that most people today poison and bag for their trash was once a lifeline. Funny how times change. Vegetable number 20, lamb's quarters. Lamb's quarters, the iron-rich volunteer. Here's the last one, and it might be the most surprising of all. Lamb's quarters, a plant most gardeners today pull out and throw away without a second thought, packed more iron than spinach, and grew so easily that Depression-era families called it nature's gift. It required absolutely no care. It just showed up. The plants appeared on their own in spring, growing rapidly to produce tender leaves that could be eaten raw in salads or cooked like spinach. What made Lamb's quarters truly remarkable was its drought tolerance. It stayed green and productive even during the driest summers, when other greens had long since withered and died. Families let some plants go to seed while harvesting others, creating a perpetual food source that cost nothing to maintain. The young shoots could be harvested like asparagus. The mature leaves provided iron-rich nutrition all season long, a weed that fed families through the hardest years in American history. Maybe it's time to stop pulling it out. These 20 vegetables aren't just plants. They're proof of what American families could do when times got hard. Tough roots that were stored all winter, greens that laughed at frost, beans that fed a family and improved the soil at the same time. Our grandparents didn't just survive the Depression. They grew their way through it, one seed at a time. If this video reminded you of something your grandfather grew or gave you an idea for what to put in the ground this season, hit that subscribe button. We've got more forgotten wisdom coming your way, and check out the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.